If you want to know how to do a 1-minute figure drawing or gesture drawing, we're going to do a breakdown and analysis of how to go about that. I posted an example just before this. It'll be linked somewhere around here, so if you haven't checked that out, watch that first. It's 1 minute, and then come back. I've had a lot of different teachers show me entirely different ways of how to do gesture drawing or figure drawing, and I've even learned a couple from books. Two of the weirdest ways is when I first started drawing, I had to outline the mass using circles of the figure, and I also did drawings where I used an ellipse to outline each body part of the figure, the torso, the arms. Those were the strangest, probably not going to help you. When I found a better figure drawing teacher, I learned a way that I got really comfortable with and picked up a few tricks of my own. The point is, there's not really one way to do this. There's a lot of different ways that you can approach figure drawing and gesture drawing, and it can feel incredibly overwhelming when you have a figure in front of you. There's so much that you don't know, and there's a million different ways that you can approach it. And the first thing that I would suggest before you even sit down to do 1-minute gestures is find reference of artists that you like that have done this before. That way you know how you want to approach it. Now obviously this is not always easy because your favorite artists might not do figure drawings or gesture drawings, at least anymore. They definitely did it at least once or twice when they were learning how to draw and paint. So you may not find anything, which is why I'm going to try to provide some examples and see if that might work for you. There's two ways I would suggest to do this, and it depends on your level of expertise and your skills. The first is to use very simple lines, so that way you're really not overwhelming yourself with any extraneous details. It's simply looking for very key things, like the curve of the body and the angle of the shoulders and hips. As beginners, you tend to hold back from leaning into like a really big gesture. This guy has a very subtle gesture, so most people would probably draw him straight up and down, but there's actually a slight angle to him. And beginners tend to draw, if you see a very steep angle, they'll bring it back. And really the thing that you want to do is make that angle go even farther. So here is the simplest version that I would do. I'm just focusing on gesture, angles, and proportions. You keep things simple, and when you start to get used to those, you can increase the complexity. The second way to tackle this would be more intermediate. That's where you build the figure in a 1-minute gesture while still being able to know that you can continue it if you want to. That means even if you're capturing the whole figure in 1 minute, you could still continue on if you wanted to, because it's built in a way that if you wanted to spend an hour on it as a study, you could continue after that 1 minute and do an hour-long study of that figure, and you wouldn't have to erase it all and do it again. That's exactly what I did here. I made it so that I could continue this if I wanted to. If you can see, I'm starting to continue it past 1 minute now, just to show you as an example of how you can keep going. Yes, there may be, proportion mistakes and angles of things that are not right, but it's a 1-minute gesture. You're moving pretty fast, so it's expected that you might make some mistakes, and that's okay. The point of that 1-minute gesture is to almost give into your instincts. See how good your knowledge really is on these subjects by making your body just do it instinctually. You get a little bit of thought process in there, but a minute is short. 30 seconds would be even shorter, and you'd be moving really fast. That would be purely instinctual. You get a little bit thinking behind this, but not a lot. A lot of it is very instinctual, and if you realize you have a lot of mistakes, that's when you go and do those longer studies to get more knowledge on the figure and the anatomy, so that way when you come back to those 1-minute gestures, your instincts will pull from that knowledge and you will have a much better figure in 1 minute. But again, you can continue it if you want. So if you're asking, how did I approach this gesture drawing? What kinds of things was I thinking about? As I mentioned before, some of this is instinctual. So I'm pulling from knowledge that I already have from longer studies and putting it into here. But I can still talk to the experience. I'm still actively thinking about each next step. The first thing I'm looking for is the angles of everything. I'm looking for that big gesture, the angles of the shoulders and the angles of the hips. You want to take a second to think ahead of how you're going to design this figure. 1 minute is not a long time, so you're going to stick to mostly line and shape instead of getting into form and lighting. Although if you get really advanced, you can get there too. But what I'm thinking about is exactly the same as the beginner drawing with the simple lines and gestures. It's just coming from a higher plane of knowledge. Beginner may be just looking at the gesture and the angle, and while I'm doing that too, I also know the forms and the anatomy, so I am outlining those areas and getting those forms down as I'm moving my way down the figure. So a piece of advice that my teacher gave me a long time ago was to turn the legs into sort of this umbrella shape, where you find the ground plane and make a cone for the legs, and then you can decide later where the legs go if you have extra time. But it simplifies the leg part so you don't have to concern yourself with the anatomy. The figure will look balanced if you've done it correctly. And that was working your way through a 1-minute gesture. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments below. I'd be happy to answer, or even do another video or a short to demonstrate an answer to whatever problem you're having. Have a happy and healthy creative process.